The crying started on the 4th day after I arrived at the liaison compound, and by the 11th day I had mapped it the way I mapped everything, by time of onset, duration, intensity, and the quality of silence that followed. It wasn't my job to map it. I was Compact Joint Forces, Senior Sergeant retired, currently posted to the Velsorn Sovereignty Frontier Liaison Station at Thresholvath Marginal as Perimeter Logistics Coordinator. That meant I tracked supply rotations, ran connector route assessments, filed weekly manifest reconciliations with the Compact Border Authority at Kethorvath 7, and kept the eastern perimeter fence maintained against the marginal atmosphere pressure differential that tended to work the lower seal joints loose every 40-odd days. It did not mean listening to a 4-month-old infant cry through the residential wing's interior wall for 11 consecutive days and developing opinions about it. But the wall was thin, the compound was small, and the crying was the kind that gets into the structure of a place the way water gets into concrete, slowly, invisibly, until one day you realize it has been there so long you can feel it in the foundations. The compound occupied a narrow footprint on the eastern edge of Thresholvath Marginal Station, which was itself a frontier installation at the edge of the Velsorn Sovereignty's administrative reach. 42 personnel, half Velsorn, half Compact. The liaison function was diplomatic in name and logistical in practice. A coordination point for the quarterly border assessment rotations, the connector route scheduling, and the 3-party mineral survey protocols that the Sovereignty, the Compact, and the Velkareth Territorial Authority all needed someone to administrate without anyone taking credit for it. I had been doing that kind of work for 19 years in various forms, and I was good at the part that did not involve other people and adequate at the part that did. I had arrived from Kethorvath 9 on the early morning connector with 1 transit case and no particular expectations. Frontier postings are what they are. You read the brief, you learn the layout, you identify what is going to need attention before it needs emergency attention, and you do the work. I had done it on 11 prior postings and saw no reason why Thresholvath Marginal would be different in any essential way. The Queen had arrived 6 days before I did. Queen Regent Velsorn Ithra. I had read the posting brief on the transit hop from Kethorvath 9. 32 years old, widowed 6 months prior when her mate, sovereign consort Velkareth Orin, died in a pressure seal failure during a routine inspection of the Eastern Atmospheric Relay. He had been a relay engineer by training, the brief noted, and had been doing his own diagnostic work rather than waiting for the scheduled maintenance team, which was the kind of detail that tells you something about a person without saying it directly. She had assumed the regent designation the same week. The infant daughter, Kaelin, had been born 4 months before the accident. The Queen had been governing alone, with a 4-month-old since the day the pressure alarm sounded. She was at the Frontier compound for a quarterly administrative review that her court advisors had apparently been unable to reschedule, without creating a diplomatic incident with the Velkareth Territorial Authority, who had scheduled their own counterpart review for the same rotation window and would not shift it. So the Queen came, with her infant, with 3 court attendants, with a specialist physician, and with a quiet that surrounded her like a second atmosphere. I noticed the quiet first, the way you notice weather. She crossed the compound corridor twice in my first 4 days, once heading to the coordination chamber for the morning administrative session, once returning in the late afternoon. Both times the attendants arranged themselves around her with a specific careful precision, like people who had learned the geometry of someone else's grief and were doing their best not to disturb it. The precision was not cold. It was the precision of long practice and genuine care, the kind that develops when you are trying very hard to make something easier for someone who will not ask you to. The Queen herself moved through the compound with the economy of motion that comes from having too many things to do and having long since stopped allocating energy to anything that was not strictly necessary. She walked the way I walk on postings where the stakes are real and the margin for distraction is narrow. Directly, with her weight forward, eyes on the path ahead and not on the walls. The infant I did not see, I heard her. Day 4, 3:40. A high, sustained cry from somewhere behind the interior wall of the residential wing, the part of the compound I had no access to and no reason to enter. I was awake anyway. I sleep lightly on frontier postings, an old habit from 31 years of knowing that the thing that went wrong always went wrong at 3:40, and I lay in my bunk in the logistics bay annex and listened. The cry had a specific quality to it, not distress exactly. Not the sharp spike of pain or the rising escalation of hunger, something more sustained, more structural, like a signal sent repeatedly into a frequency where no answer was coming back. It lasted 40 minutes, tapered to silence, then resumed at 6:20. Day 5 was the same. Day 6 I asked Coordinator Velorveth SAE, the compound's Velsorn administrative lead, a composed, precise woman of about 50 who ran the quarterly reviews with the efficiency of someone who had been running them for 20 years and had no patience for anyone who hadn't, whether the infant was being seen by the compound physician or the specialist the Queen had brought. She looked at me the way she looked at most of my questions, which was the look of a person evaluating whether the answer was within the scope of information she was authorized to share with a compact logistics coordinator. The specialist is attending daily, she said. The physician has recommended a feeding protocol adjustment. The attendants are rotating in 4-hour shifts. Has anything worked? I said. The pause before she answered told me everything. The infant's condition is not your concern, Senior Sergeant. No, I said, it isn't. I went back to the manifest reconciliation and did not ask again. Day 7 through day 10, the crying continued. Not continuously, there were hours of quiet, usually in the early afternoon, and the staff learned to work quickly during those windows, moving through the corridors faster, speaking in lower voices, as if by holding the compound still they could extend the silence. It didn't work. The infant cried at 3:40 with the reliability of a schedule, and again at 6:20, and again at 1400 when the afternoon quiet ended, and again at 1900 when the light through the eastern perimeter windows shifted from white to amber, and the compound's temperature dropped 2 degrees. Which it did every evening because the atmospheric seal on the eastern-facing wall was not rated for the marginal zone pressure differential, and I had filed 3 maintenance requests about it that had not been actioned. I filed a 4th request on day 7 with diagnostic readings attached and a note about the structural survey report from the previous rotation that had flagged the same issue. Then I got the materials from the perimeter maintenance locker and fixed it myself on day 9. When I was done, the east corridor temperature stabilized by 1.76 degrees, and the low harmonic hum from the junction panel stopped. I filed a completion record and moved on. No one mentioned it. That was normal. The things that stop going wrong do not tend to generate the same attention as the things that start going wrong, and I have spent 31 years making peace with that. By day 10, I had stopped thinking of the infants crying as crying and started thinking of it as a structural condition of the compound, like the Eastern Seal, or the manifests that the Velkareth Authority filed 3 days late every rotation. Something that was going to persist until it was correctly addressed, which would require identifying what was actually causing it, which was not something anyone had asked me to do. I was aware that I was thinking about it more than my job required. That is how I am built. Something unresolved stays in the background of my attention like a loose bearing in a drive assembly, not loud enough to stop work, but present enough that every other process runs less cleanly. The fastest way to clear a loose bearing is to fix it. Day 11, 3:40, the crying started. I was already awake. I had been awake since 3:10 without being certain why, which meant my body had decided something was different about this particular 3:40 before my conscious mind had processed it. I lay still for a moment, listening. The crying was different, not louder, not more distressed. It had a quality of exhaustion in it, not the infant's exhaustion, because infants at 4 months do not sound tired when they cry, they sound relentless, but the exhaustion of the space around it. The compound itself had stopped adjusting. For 10 days the staff had been recalibrating around the sound, holding collective breath, waiting for the specialist's next recommendation to work. On day 11, at 3:40, the compound had run out of recalibration. It was just the crying now, in a space that had stopped pretending it was going to stop. At 4:12 my door opened. I sat up. The light was low. The corridor panels ran at 30% between 2200 and 600, a Velsorn residential protocol I had noted on day 1. In the doorway was a Velsorn court attendant I had seen twice before, a young woman named Velarak Setha by her designation pin, who had been rotating through the residential wing shifts. Her skin was the deep copper blue of the Arak secondary house, and her eyes, which were normally precise and professionally neutral, had the particular quality of someone who had been awake for a very long time and had just walked through a door they had not planned to open. She said nothing for a moment. I said nothing either. I have found, in 31 years of situations that required quick calibration, that the person who waited tended to receive more accurate information than the person who asked. "Senior Sergeant Wren," she said finally. Her compact standard was formal and careful. "I am not authorized to make this request." "All right," I said. "The infant has been crying for 11 days. Every protocol has been attempted. The specialist is..." She stopped, started again. "The specialist has suggested that the infant may require a form of physical containment that the Velsorn carry posture tradition does not provide. There is a compact field manual, the Emergency Infant Carry Protocol, Annex 7 of the Compact Joint Forces Medical Supplement, that describes a specific pressure distribution method used in collapse structure extractions." I had written training notes on Annex 7, 14 years ago, on a posting at Kethvora Station, during a structural collapse exercise in which the training scenario had included an infant casualty, and no one in the unit had known what to do with her. I had found the manual afterward and read it because that was the kind of thing I did with things I did not know. I had kept the notes. I had not thought about them in 14 years, but I had kept them. "You want me to try the field carry?" I said. "The Queen..." She stopped again. Something in her face shifted in the low corridor light, the careful attendant's composure giving way to something more direct and more tired. "The Queen has not slept more than 2 hours at a time in 11 days, Senior Sergeant. She is governing a sovereignty and managing a quarterly administrative review, and she is doing it on 2 hours of sleep while her daughter cries. The specialist filed a recommendation this afternoon for pharmaceutical sedation. The Queen declined it." "Why?" I said. "Because she wants to know her daughter is quiet because she is settled, not because she has been medicated into stillness." I understood that. It was the kind of distinction that a person who reads manuals makes, as opposed to a person who reads outcomes. I got up. "I need to wash my hands first," I said. "And I need you to tell me the infant's weight, her feeding schedule, and the last time her back was properly supported in a horizontal carry rather than a vertical one." Velarak Setha blinked. Then she answered all 3 questions without hesitation, which told me she had been thinking about this conversation for some time before she knocked on my door. The weight was 4.2 compact standard units, which was on the smaller end for 4 months but within the normal range for Velsorn infants, who were typically slightly smaller than compact baseline at birth and grew faster after the first year. The feeding schedule was every 3 hours, last feed at 2:30. The horizontal carry, she had to think about this one. The specialist had recommended vertical pressure against the chest, which was the standard Velsorn comfort posture for early infancy. Horizontal support had not been attempted systematically. It matters, I said, because at 4 months the vestibular system is the primary settlement mechanism. Vertical carry stimulates alertness. Horizontal carry, with the right lateral pressure and a specific oscillation frequency, triggers the settling response. The compact field manual has the specifications. "Do you know them?" she said. "Yes," I said. She led me through the corridor I was not supposed to enter. The residential wing of the compound was quieter than the logistics section. A different quality of quiet, not the absence of sound, but the deliberate management of it. The panels here ran at 20%, low amber, and the temperature was 2 degrees higher than the rest of the compound. The corridor was narrow, 3 doors on the left side, 2 on the right. I had never been past the junction that marked the residential wing boundary, and I did not look at the doors as I passed them. What was behind the doors was not my business unless it became my business, and I have found that people who make other people's business their own tend to accumulate complications they did not budget for. The room at the end was the Queen's. Veleric Setha stopped outside it and knocked once, a specific pattern 3 short, 1 long that was clearly a code rather than a request. There was a pause. Then the door opened. The room was larger than I had expected for a frontier compound. A low, wide sleeping platform on the far wall, unoccupied and precisely made, which meant she had not been in it tonight. A work table with 3 stacked data panels and a carafe of something dark and cold that had not been touched. 2 chairs angled toward each other, as if placed by someone who had the habit of arranging things to accommodate more than one person, and had not stopped doing it after the second person was gone. A narrow window that looked onto the east garden. A second attendant, older, standing near the work table with the expression of someone who had reached the end of her competence and was aware of it. And the Queen. She was standing near the window, holding her daughter. Her skin was silver gray, the moderate tier of the Velsorn primary house, smooth and precise in the low light, and her hair was dark copper pulled back in the practical arrangement of someone who had stopped caring about formal presentation at some point in the last several days, and had not gone back. She was wearing what looked like a working robe rather than court dress, plain dark gray, no insignia, the kind of garment that is chosen for comfort rather than function when comfort and function have both become secondary to simply continuing. Her eyes were the color of pale teal, and they were fixed on me with the particular quality of someone who has been awake for too long and is beyond the stage where surprise registers normally. There was no hostility in the look, no suspicion. Just the assessment of someone who had exhausted everything she knew and was looking at something she did not. She did not speak. Neither did I. I crossed the room to where she was standing, and I held out my arms in the specific carry posture, forearms parallel, left forearm supporting the length of the spine, right hand cupping the occiput, a 30-degree lateral tilt that put the infant's right ear slightly downward, and I looked at the Queen rather than at the infant and waited. She looked at my arms. She looked at my face. Whatever she was calculating in that moment, she finished it, and she transferred the infant to me. The infant was warm. Warmer than I expected. Velsorn infant temperature runs about half a degree higher than compact baseline, which I had also read in Annex 7. And she was tense in the way that 4 months of intermittent distress produces in a small body, the muscles not relaxed but held, every surface braced against the next wave of whatever was wrong. She was crying with her whole self, the kind of crying that uses the chest and the throat and the arms and the legs simultaneously, the kind that has stopped being about any specific cause and has become its own condition. I adjusted the lateral tilt to 35 degrees. I shifted my left forearm so the pressure distribution ran from the base of the spine to the shoulder blades rather than centered at the mid-back. I began the oscillation, not rocking, which is a vertical motion that adds vestibular stimulation, but a lateral sway, slow and specific. The frequency the manual specified as 1.2 cycles per second, which I counted internally the way I count a lot of things, silently, without moving my lips. The crying did not stop immediately. It changed. The first change was a pause, a single intake of breath that interrupted the rhythm of the sound, the way a hiccup interrupts speech. Then the sound resumed, but lower. Still present, still distress, but the structural quality of it had shifted. The bracing in the small body against my forearm was slightly less. I kept the oscillation at 1.2 cycles per second. I kept the lateral tilt. I kept my arms where they were, which required a specific kind of stillness, not rigidity but steadiness, the kind of stillness that comes from understanding that you are a structural element and the other party needs you not to change. 2 minutes, the crying dropped another register. 3 minutes, the legs stopped moving. 4 minutes and 40 seconds by my internal count, the crying stopped. Not tapered to silence. Stopped. The way a machine stops when you find the right switch, complete, abrupt, the absence of the sound so sudden that it seemed to take up space in the room the way the sound had. The room held the shape of the silence for a moment, all four of us in it adjusting to the new structural reality of the compound. The first time in 11 days that this particular space had been without this particular sound. I kept the oscillation going. The infant's breathing changed, still uneven, the aftermath of sustained distress, but settling toward a rhythm. Her hands, which had been fisted against my sleeve, loosened. The small shoulders, which had been drawn up toward the ears, lowered. Her eyes, which had been closed and tight, stayed closed, but the tension around them released. I had not looked at the Queen since I began. I looked at her now. She was still standing in the same place near the window. Both hands were at her sides. Her posture was the posture of someone who had been braced for impact for 11 days and had just been told, without warning, that the impact was not coming, and her body had not yet received the information. Her pale teal eyes were fixed on the infant, and the expression on her face was the expression I have seen once or twice in 31 years of being present at moments when something that has been broken for a very long time is abruptly not broken anymore. It is not relief, exactly. It is the specific thing that exists in the gap between the expectation of continuing pain and the fact of its absence, before the mind has finished translating the fact into belief. She did not cry. Her jaw was set with the particular precision of someone who has made a decision about that, a deliberate structural choice rather than the natural absence of it. But her eyes were wet, and she did not look away. And in the low amber light of the room I could see the exact moment when 6 months of compacted grief found the small, specific gap that this moment had opened in it, and moved through it, and she stood there and let it and did not make a sound. I kept the oscillation, 1.2 cycles per second, I counted. After approximately 3 minutes, I lost the exact count somewhere in there, which does not happen to me often. The older attendant near the work table said something in Velsorn, very quietly, and the Queen replied, equally quietly, and the older attendant moved to one of the chairs and sat down with the air of someone who has been standing for a very long time and has just been given permission to stop. Velaric Setha was still near the door. I looked at her. "How long does she need to settle fully?" she asked, keeping her voice low. 20 minutes at this oscillation, I said. Then I can attempt a transfer to a horizontal sleeping surface. The key is maintaining the lateral pressure during transfer. You'll need to use a rolled blanket along the left side to preserve the 35-degree tilt once she's down. "We have done the blanket roll," Setha said. "It didn't hold." "Show me what you used." She produced a standard compound blanket folded in thirds. I looked at it. "That's too soft," I said. "You need something with more compression resistance, a tightly rolled sleeping mat insert, or a thermal liner if you have one. The point is that the lateral pressure has to be maintained after the transfer or the vestibular signal changes, and she resettles into distress. The blanket is collapsing under her weight and losing the angle. Setha left the room. She came back in 4 minutes with a thermal liner from the supply cabinet in the corridor, the kind used in cold exposure field protocols, tightly woven synthetic fill that held its shape under load. I looked at it, tested the compression with one hand, and nodded. Place it along the left edge of the sleeping surface. Roll it once. The angle wants to be 30 to 35 degrees from horizontal. She did it precisely and without asking for clarification, which I noted as a quality I respected. There are people who ask clarifying questions to confirm they have understood, and people who ask clarifying questions to avoid having to act, and Setha was clearly the first kind, but in this case, she simply did not need to ask. By the time the infant was ready to transfer, she was deeply asleep, not the light surface sleep of a child who might startle back awake at a change in contact, but the hard, complete sleep of a small body that has been spending enormous effort for 11 days and has just discovered it can stop. I transferred her with a movement that I had used twice in the field, once with an actual infant casualty, and once in the Kethvora exercise, a slow, continuous lateral to supine rotation that maintained the pressure distribution throughout. She did not stir. She lay on the sleeping surface with the thermal liner holding the 32-degree tilt I had settled on as the optimum, her hands open now, her breathing even, her face entirely relaxed. I straightened up. The room was very quiet. The kind of quiet that is made of things stopping rather than things being absent. I looked at the Queen. She was looking at her daughter, not at me, just at Kaelin, who was sleeping for what I gathered from the expressions of everyone in the room was the first time in 11 days without pharmaceutical assistance or a specialist's intervention, just sleeping because her vestibular system had received the correct input and her body had done what it was designed to do. The Queen's hands were still at her sides. Her breathing had changed, slower now, the rhythm of someone who has been running a sustained emergency and has just been told for the first time that the emergency has paused. "The feeding at 5:30, I said, keeping my voice at the same low register I had been using. "Don't adjust her position before then. The liner will hold. If she stirs, the oscillation is 1.2 cycles per second, lateral 35-degree tilt, not rocking, lateral." The Queen looked at me then. I have been looked at in a number of ways in 31 years, by superior officers with authority, by hostile parties across a contested perimeter, by the compact border authority with the exhaustion of people who process too many manifests. The Velsorn Sovereignty's Queen Regent looked at me with an expression I did not have a word for and still don't, something that was not gratitude exactly and was not recognition in any formal sense, and was not the relief I had expected. It was more interior than any of those, something that had been locked behind the composure and the grief farmer and the 11 days of systematic failure. And it was looking at me now with the directness of something freed from a container. It was not meant to stay in. She said in compact standard very quietly, "What is your name, Senior Sergeant?" "Dale Wren," I said. She said it once, quietly, the way you say a thing that you are committing to memory rather than just to the moment. Dale Wren. 2 syllables flat, nothing remarkable about it. The kind of name that does not carry any weight of its own, and depends entirely on the person it belongs to. "The Compact Joint Forces Medical Supplement," she said. "Annex 7. "Yes. You read it." 14 years ago, I said, after a training exercise at Kethvora where no one knew what to do. There was a pause. She looked back at her daughter sleeping. "I have a specialist physician," she said. "I have 3 court attendants who have served infant royalty in the sovereignty for a combined 47 years. I have a compact border physician who reviewed the case 3 days ago by remote consultation. None of them, she stopped. Began again. 7 recommendations, 11 days, 4 protocol adjustments. A pharmaceutical sedation option. I declined this afternoon. Velsorn carry tradition is vertical, I said. It's the correct tradition for most of the development window. At 4 months, the vestibular system is at a specific sensitivity threshold, where the horizontal lateral carry is more effective. It's not in the Velsorn training manuals because the data was gathered in compact field conditions, collapsed structure extractions, where vertical carry is impossible and you improvise. The specialists were applying the correct knowledge for the wrong stage. She was quiet for a moment. Then she said, "How long have you been at this compound, Senior Sergeant Wren?" 11 days, I said. The pause was longer this time. And you have been listening to her cry for 11 days, she said. The walls are thin, I said. Something moved across her face. It was not quite a smile. It was the shape that a smile would take if it had been a long time since it had been used and the person was recalibrating the musculature. It did not reach her eyes fully, but it was there and it was genuine, and I noted it the way I noted everything, as data and as something worth returning to. You should sleep, I said. The 5:30 feed Velaric Setha can manage the transfer if she uses the lateral oscillation. I'll write the specifications down. You don't have to leave, the Queen said. I stayed. I sat in one of the 2 chairs near the work table and wrote the specifications on a data panel, the oscillation frequency, the tilt angle, the transfer method, the thermal liner placement, the key indicators that the infant was entering deep sleep versus light surface sleep, and 3 common errors in the Velsorn carry posture that produced vestibular stimulation when the intention was settlement. I wrote it the way I write maintenance specifications, clearly in order, without assuming the reader has prior knowledge, but also without condescending. Setha read it over my shoulder for the last half of it. When I finished, she said, "I understand," in a tone that confirmed she did. The Queen sat in the second chair. She did not sleep. She did not work. She sat with her hands folded in her lap and looked at her daughter. And after a while, I stopped watching her do it because it seemed like a private thing. At some point, 4:50, by my internal estimate, the older attendant produced the carafe from the work table and poured 2 cups of whatever was in it. Cold, dark, slightly bitter. A Velsorn grain concentrate, I gathered, the kind that was served at working sessions rather than formal ones. She placed 1 cup beside me and 1 beside the Queen without being asked by either of us, and then she returned to her chair. I drank mine. It was not good. I drank it anyway because refusing it would have been a different kind of statement than accepting it, and accepting it was the correct kind. At 5:30, Kalen stirred. Setha had the lateral oscillation in place before the stirring became distress. She had timed it precisely, starting the gentle lateral sway at the first sound of the infant waking rather than waiting for the escalation. The infant settled back within 90 seconds. I watched Setha do it and made one small correction. Her frequency was running at 1 rather than 1.2, which is an easy error because 1 feels natural and 1.2 feels artificially fast until you have done it enough times to know the difference. She adjusted without comment, and the infant settled the rest of the way. At 600, they fed her. Kalen was awake and calm and ate with the focused efficiency of an infant who has had, for the first time in 11 days, enough sleep to approach the world without distress about it. The Queen fed her in the second chair, turned slightly away from me in a gesture that was less about modesty than about the specific privacy of a thing she had not been able to do in a quiet space for 11 days. I looked at the eastern window. The garden outside was gray in the pre-dawn light, a few low-growing plants in the frost-resistant planting beds, a stone bench against the east wall. The amber seal indicator on the atmospheric panel was green. I had fixed the seal 2 days ago, and the indicator had updated, which no one had apparently noticed or mentioned. But the indicator was green, and the temperature was stable, and the harmonic hum from the junction panel was gone. The eastern garden had always been there. It was the first time in 11 days that there had been enough quiet in the compound to notice it. After the 600 feed, the Queen put the infant down on the sleeping surface with the liner in place. She did it herself, without Setha's help, using the lateral oscillation and the transfer method I had written. Her hands were precise and very careful. The infant settled without a sound. The Queen straightened up and turned. Court Coordinator Velorvath will conduct the morning administrative session at 800, she said. I would like you to be present. That's outside my posting scope, Your Majesty, I said. I am aware, she said. I would like you to be present regardless. I said nothing for a moment. Then I said, all right. She looked at me with the pale teal eyes that had been looking at her daughter for the past 2 hours, and were now looking at me with the same quality of attention. Complete, direct, the kind that does not estimate or approximate but simply takes in what is there and adds it to what is already known. The carafe is cold, she said. There is a commissary on the west corridor that opens at 6:30. If you have time before the 800 session, the grain concentrate there is warm. Thank you, I said. I am the one thanking you, Senior Sergeant Wren. You're thanking me for reading a manual, I said. The thing that was almost a smile came back. This time it reached a little further. Yes, she said, among other things. I went to the commissary. I had the grain concentrate, which was warm and marginally better than the cold version, and I wrote 3 follow-up items in my personal log. The oscillation specification complete version for Setha's reference. A note to obtain 2 additional thermal liners from the supply depot at Kethorvath 7 for the compound stock, so there would always be one available regardless of laundry rotation, and a reminder to follow up on the Eastern Perimeter maintenance request that still had not been formally closed in the system, despite the actual repair having been completed 4 days ago. Administrative loose ends have a way of generating secondary problems if you leave them open, and I have spent 31 years making sure the secondary problems do not arrive. At 800, I went to the coordination chamber. Court Coordinator Velorvath SAE was already there. She looked at me with the expression she used for things that were outside the parameters she had established, which was different from surprise. It was the expression of someone recalibrating a model, not abandoning it. She said nothing. The Queen arrived at 8:03. She was in court dress now dark blue, formal, the sovereignty's seal at the shoulder, and her hair was arranged and her posture was the posture of a regent rather than a woman who had spent the night in a chair watching her daughter sleep. She looked, to anyone who had not been in the room at 4:12, like someone who had slept 8 hours. She had not. I was the only person in the coordination chamber who knew that, and I did not say anything about it. The session was a quarterly border assessment review, connector route timing, mineral survey protocol revisions, atmospheric monitoring data from the Eastern Perimeter, and 3 outstanding maintenance requests from the Velkarath Territorial Authority that needed formal response. I understood about 60% of the technical content at the appropriate depth, which was enough to be useful when the question of the Eastern Perimeter maintenance logs came up, because it turned out that the closed maintenance request was referenced in the border assessment documentation, and the fact that the repair had been completed 4 days ahead of the formal schedule was relevant to the connector route timing for the next rotation window. I explained this when Velorvath SAE reached that section. She looked at me with the recalibrating expression again, slightly more pronounced, and made a notation. After the session, as the chamber was clearing, the Queen said, in front of Velorvath SAE and 2 junior attendants, Senior Sergeant Wren resolved the infant settlement issue last night using a compact field protocol. I would like his posting extended by 30 days, and his scope designation amended to include advisory liaison function. Velorvath C's expression was the most controlled thing I had seen in 11 days at this compound, which was saying something. The scope amendment will require authorization from the Compact Border Authority at Kethorvath 7, she said. File the request today, the Queen said. Yes, Your Majesty. She did not look at me again during this exchange. She did not need to. The recognition was already on the record, spoken in front of witnesses, matter of fact and precise in the way that a recognition only is when the person making it has already decided that the thing being named is true and is simply saying so. I did not say anything in the chamber. There was nothing to say that would have added to what she had already said, and I have spent 31 years learning that the moment after a thing is correctly stated is not the moment to add to it. Later in the early afternoon, Kalen had slept 4 consecutive hours and woken for the 1300 feed without distress, which Setha reported to me in the corridor with the expression of someone whose 11 days of exhaustion were still present, but had been reorganized into something manageable. I was in the East Garden checking the atmospheric seal on the exterior panel when the Queen came through the garden door. She was not in court dress. The working robe again, the practical arrangement of her hair, no insignia. She carried nothing. She walked to the stone bench against the east wall and sat down without looking to see if I would follow. I finished the seal check. The reading was stable. I made a note in the maintenance log, put the diagnostic unit back in the pouch on my belt, and went and sat on the other end of the bench. We were quiet for a moment. The eastern atmosphere through the compound's outer panels had the particular quality of mid-afternoon on a marginal zone station, flat light, slight haze from the particulate filtration system, the low-distance sound of the connector route traffic from Thresholvath's main hub. It was not a beautiful view. It was a functional one, which in my experience is the more reliable kind. Beautiful views are subject to weather and season, and the particular quality of light on a given afternoon. Functional views are just the station going about its business, and that tends to be consistent. She is sleeping, the Queen said. Good, I said. Setha used the lateral oscillation for the noon hour settling. She said it took 4 minutes. It should be under 2 by the end of the week, I said. The infant's nervous system learns the signal. By the time she's 6 months, you'll be able to settle her with standard vertical carry again. The vestibular sensitivity window peaks around 4 months and then normalizes. You know this from the manual, she said. And from the Kethvora exercise, I said. And from subsequent reading. Once you know there's a gap in what you know, reading into it is the obvious next step. She considered this. My husband was the same way, she said. He called it closing the tolerance. In relay engineering, if a component is rated for a load range, and you don't know where in that range you're actually operating, you have an unquantified risk. He hated unquantified risks. Sensible, I said. He died on a routine diagnostic because the pressure seal had a tolerance drift that no one had quantified, she said. It was in the maintenance log. The log had not been cross-referenced with the relay load data. She said it the way she said everything, directly, without emphasis, the words carrying exactly as much weight as the facts warranted and no more. He would have found it. He would have been there for another 2 hours and he would have found it and he would have come home. I did not say I was sorry. I have said it before, in situations that seemed to require it, and I have always found it insufficient and slightly dishonest. I was sorry. The words were too small for what they were supposed to carry, and everyone in those situations knows it. He kept notes on everything, she said after a moment. That was the kind of person he was. Useful quality, I said. Yes, she looked at the East Garden. Kalen has his hands. I notice it when she sleeps, the same particular way of holding the fingers. The bench was stone, and the afternoon light was coming off the perimeter panels at a low angle that put us both in shadow. The station's ambient sound was the low, familiar hum of a facility maintaining itself. Ventilation, connector route traffic, the distant click of the atmospheric monitoring array cycling through its check sequence. "My husband knew this kind of thing," she said eventually. "Not infant development specifically, but the kind of thing where you read a manual that no one has told you is relevant, and then it turns out to be exactly relevant when you need it. He said it was just paying attention to what you don't know." "That's the whole of it," I said. "Most failures I've seen come down to someone who was certain they already knew." She looked at me, the pale teal eyes in the compound's flat afternoon light. "Senior Sergeant Wren," she said, "have you eaten today?" I thought about it. "The grain concentrate at 6:30, nothing since." "Not since 6:30, I said. "There is a commissary meal at 1400, she said. "Velorvath will have eaten already. The attendants are with Kalen. The chamber is available." "Are you asking me to eat in the coordination chamber with you?" I said. "I am asking whether you have eaten," she said. "You may interpret that as you prefer." I interpreted it. "All right," I said. We sat in the coordination chamber with 2 trays from the commissary and ate the 1400 meal, which was a Velsorn grain and protein preparation that was better than the concentrate and worse than anything I would have made myself if I had access to a kitchen. And we talked about the Eastern Perimeter Seal and the connector route timing and the quarterly maintenance protocols that the Velsorn sovereignty used for frontier compound installations, which it turned out were significantly less systematic than the compact equivalent, and had a specific gap in the cross-referencing methodology that I mentioned once and did not mention again. She heard it once. We talked about Oren Velkareth, who had kept relay engineering notes in a personal log that was still at the Capitol, and who had died on a standard diagnostic check because a tolerance drift had gone uncross-referenced. We talked about Kalen's hands and the way a 4-month-old processes the world through vestibular sensation more than through any other sense, and the way that 1.2 cycles per second was derived from the average frequency of a human adult's natural walking pace, because what a distressed infant needed was the specific signal that said someone competent was moving through the world and carrying them. "That's what the manual says it means," she said. "That's the hypothesis in the supplementary notes," I said. "The frequency matches walking pace. The infant reads it as locomotion, safety, sleep." She was quiet for a moment. "He carried her that way when she was very small. He walked with her rather than rocking her. He said it felt right." "It was right," I said. She looked at her tray, then she looked at me. "You will have to teach me," she said. "The specifications are in the document I wrote for Setha," I said. "They're clear." "I mean teach me," she said, "not the document, you." I understood what she meant. There is a difference between a specification and a demonstration, and a further difference between a demonstration and someone standing next to you until your hands know it without the page. I had been taught things both ways and I knew which one held. "All right," I said. She asked me, at some point, whether I planned to stay in compact logistics work after the posting ended. I told her I had been planning to retire, that I had enough service years and the retirement stipend was sufficient, and there was a property on Kethorvath 9 that I had been considering, a small parcel on the eastern plateau that was zoned for residential use, and had what the registry listed as a moderate atmospheric view quality, which in my experience meant the view was good, and whoever wrote the registry entry was under-exaggerating. She asked what I would do with a property on Kethorvath 9. I told her I would maintain it. She looked at me for a moment with the pale teal eyes. "You could maintain things here," she said. I looked at my tray, then I looked at her. "Your Majesty," I said, "the scope amendment that Velorvath SAE filed this morning is 30 days. "Scope amendments can be renewed," she said. I thought about the East Garden and the stone bench and the green seal indicator on the atmospheric panel. I thought about Kalen sleeping 4 hours without distress. I thought about the particular quality of a compound that had stopped recalibrating and started simply being a place where things were correctly maintained. I thought about a relay engineer who had kept notes on everything and had died because a cross-reference gap in a maintenance log had not been closed. And I thought about the person who had been managing the consequences of that unclosed gap for 6 months on 2 hours of sleep. And I thought about what it would mean to stay. "They can," I said. "You fixed the eastern seal," she said. "Day 9, I said. The harmonic hum was in the structural survey report from the last rotation, and no one had actioned it. The temperature in the east corridor stabilized by 1.8 degrees. 1.76, I said. I measured it. She looked at me with the look that was now becoming a look I recognized, the one that had not had a word for it at 500 this morning, and still did not have a precise one, but was cleaner now, less locked behind the grief farmer and the exhaustion. Something that was simply the queen looking at the person across the table and seeing him. Not the logistics coordinator, not the man who read the manual, not the compact posting her court had accepted as a functional necessity. The person. "I will ask the compact border authority to authorize an indefinite scope amendment," she said. "You may decline if the posting does not suit your plans." I thought about the eastern plateau on Kethorvath 9, the moderate atmospheric view, the property that would need maintaining, which I could do alone with the same efficiency I did everything else. I thought about doing it alone, which was the version of the future I had been planning. It was sufficient. It was the correct size for what I had been, up until 11 days ago. "I'll review the authorization terms when they're filed," I said. "If they're reasonable, I won't decline." She nodded once precisely, the way she handled things that were settled. We finished the meal. I filed the maintenance log update for the perimeter seal and closed the outstanding request in the system, which meant the administrative record now matched the physical state of the compound, which is the only correct relationship between those two things. She returned to the residential wing for the 1600 feeding. At 1900, when the eastern light shifted to amber and the compound temperature held at its corrected level, 1.76 degrees more stable than it had been for the previous 8 rotations, I was in the east garden doing a final perimeter check. I stood with the diagnostic unit in my hand for a moment after I finished and listened to the compound. The crying was not there. In its place was the sound the compound actually made: ventilation, the atmospheric monitoring array, the low harmonic of the connector route traffic on the eastern approach, the specific silence of 42 people going about their evening without bracing against something. I stood there for a moment in the amber light and listened to all of it, and I thought about a woman in a gray working robe sitting in a chair at 4:50 in the morning drinking cold grain concentrate because the attendant had produced it without being asked, and about a 4-month-old with her father's hands sleeping on a 32-degree lateral liner tilt, and about the 1.2 cycles per second that meant someone competent was moving through the world. Then I filed the perimeter check, went to the commissary, got the last of the grain concentrate, and went to write the oscillation specification update for Setha's evening settling protocol, because by the end of the week it would be under 2 minutes, and I wanted the documentation to reflect that when it happened. Some things you maintain because they are broken and need to be fixed. Some things you maintain because they are working, and the work is worth continuing. I wrote the specification. I put the date at the top of the page, and I put my name beside it, and I left a space at the bottom where there would eventually be a second name, when the scope amendment was authorized and the terms were reasonable, which I had no doubt they would be. I am good at reading manuals. I am better at reading situations. And some situations, you do not need a manual to understand. You just need to hold still and pay attention and let the thing that has been crying finally rest.